Hi, my name is Madeline Trader. This is the second critical analysis for crime in Italian cinema. The two options that I decided to talk about today were Once Upon a Time in the West and The Night Porter. Sorry, I'm adjusting the camera. I'm going to give a brief synopsis before I dive into the differences and similarities of the films, just so we get a clear idea of what we're talking about. Once Upon a Time in the West takes place regarding this man named Frank and Harmonica. Harmonica's brother was brutally assassinated by Frank, and Harmonica's mission is to hunt Frank down and get his revenge. Now, in The Night Porter, there's this woman named Lucia. She is a concentration camp survivor, and she meets with her former abuser, Max, 13 years later in Vienna, where they continue their horrendous relationship. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, I am going to talk about the similarities and the differences between these two films. And I'm going to start off with the similarities that I've noticed between class lecture, the video themselves, and the readings. So, firstly, in both films, the characters had different names either during or once a traumatic, life-altering event has happened to them. So in The Night Porter, it is well known that Jewish and non-Jewish people were given numbers while in the concentration camps, ripping away their name and their title from them. In The Night Porter, Max, Lucia's lover and tormentor, marks Lucia with her number. Big thing. And then in Once Upon a Time in the West, we know that Harmonica got his name based on the instrument that Frank put in his mouth while having to hold his brother's weight on his shoulder before he fell to his knees, causing the death of his brother. So name change was a really big theme in both of the films that I don't know if a lot of people picked up on, but I did. And then another big thing was the role of race and ethnicity. In The Night Porter, while neither Lucia or Max are Jewish, discussing World War II and the concentration camp system, how many people were brutally murdered and assassinated based off their ethnicity and background. And in The Night Porter, we see that the young version of Harmonica is supposed to be Native American. I don't understand how that correlates to the white actor, but when I was doing research, it was depicted that he was Native American. And as we know, a lot of Native Americans were specifically in that time period of Westerns and cowboys and stuff like that. Another similarity that I noticed between the films was the past and traumatic events. Both characters had really life-altering events that caused a hyperfixation on their past and trauma that they endured. So in The Night Porter, Lucia had moments where frames and flashbacks both affected her everyday life, highlighting how her trauma affects her to this day and caused her to end her life. In Once Upon a Time in the West, the traumatic event that led Harmonica to his ambition to kill was the death of his older brother, causing the murder of Frank. Both characters have suffered life-altering events that correspond to their day trauma that they still hold with them that represent strongly throughout the film. One thing that I really liked was the gray zone. It was really discussed in The Night Porter, but it really correlates to Once Upon a Time in the West as well. So beyond good and evil, in the film The Night Porter, the gray zone is known as a concentration camp, and like Luisa's and Max's relationship is legalized in there, but not in Vienna. And then in Once Upon in the West, the gray zone can be identified as Frank as killing Harmonica. As we know, murder is a very serious crime, but many individuals in society can justify in certain circumstances, making it a gray moral zone, but like also could be known as the gray zone. And then two other differences I noticed, because I'm kind of running low on time, is death. Both characters in the film either die or has another character in the film die. In The Night Porter, our main character, Lucia, ends her life because of the trauma she's endured. And then in Once Upon a Time in the West, Harmonica witnesses his brother's death due to Frank and then sets out to murder Frank and successfully does so. And the one other thing I noticed was the obsessiveness. In Once Upon a Time in the West, we see that Harmonica becomes obsessed with attempting to end Frank's life based on the trauma that he has caused him and the pain that he has caused him. While in The Night Porter, we see how Max's obsession with Lucia resulted in isolation from the outside world and they become addicted to one another. All right, so now that we've gotten the similarities out of the way, I want to talk about the differences. Both of our protagonists face significant amounts of trauma, but handle the outcomes very differently, as we discussed. Lucia has flashbacks and isolates herself while looking at her trauma. In the clip, we see her in the bathroom alone by herself. While Harmonica, on the other hand, faces his trauma right in the eye. He goes to attack Frank rather than hiding behind a wall, like Lucia did. Not saying it's bad, just pointing out the fact that he faces his fears head on. And then I noticed that lighting and style was very different. In The Night Porter, hallucinations, low lighting with flashes is supposed to emphasize the quality of memory in the concentration camp, and it was a lot of blue, darker blue tones with harsh lighting. And then in Once Upon a Time in the West, the style is demonstrated with beige and orange colors with a harsh, direct, natural sunlight tone to emphasize we're outside. It's not gloomy. Compared to The Night Porter, I found it was very gloomy. And then the last thing I noticed that was different was the time frames. In both Once Upon a Time in the West and The Night Porter are very different. In Once Upon a Time in the West, the frames are consistent and do not jump between the past and present as frequently. We're shown events in chronicle order for a majority of the film, while in The Night Porter, however, we go back and forth between Lucia's flashbacks of her in the concentration camps and how she deals with it in the present tense. All right. Thank you so much for listening. Yeah, these are the differences and the similarities between those two films. Honestly, two very good films, I will say.